Hi all, welcome to the demos for the Mixing and Mastering Workshop. We're going to start off with an orchestral piece. But before that, I wanted to go over some of the file structure for Reaper projects. So this project I'm working on, Ludwig, the Accursed, and the Holy Blade, you'll see these backups are auto-generated by Reaper. You can delete them if you don't need them. But these here are the audio files. So they'll have some sort of audio file extension like FLAC or WAV. And we'll have one for each, I guess, I don't know if it's the right terminology, but clip in the project. So we'll have one for choir left, one for choir center, one for choir right. We'll have one file for each of these keyboard one clips, and then these ones as well. And so you'll see we have a bunch of different keyboard one clips. Now that's because I've consolidated the project, and that'll be the case for the future concert recordings, most likely. But it is possible, for example, if I were to split this clip up and delete this part, the entire audio file still remains in the project with the removed segment. But in this case, these clips have been split up. And then lastly, this is the RPP file. So this is the actual project file. And this has all the information such as what position the faders are at, what effects are on each track, and so on. So that's useful because it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's like in the kilobytes because it's pretty simple data. And so if you're working on a project and say you're collaborating with someone or you want to save your progress to Google Drive, which I recommend you do, if you have all the audio files uploaded already, all you have to do to save your progress, assuming you didn't change any of the audio files themselves, you were just using effects, maybe adjusting the pan knobs, the faders, even effects on the master channel. All you have to do is re-upload that RPP file, and that has all of the changes you've made. Cool. So with that, let's get started. I'm just going to kind of take a listen and some different parts of the song and see what maybe needs adjusting. I also want to get the loudness of these clips relatively correct, just so that the waveforms are a little more useful to me, though these are already pretty loud. So I'm going to go to loud part of the song. Let's see what that sounds like. And then at the end here, we should have the applause. Yeah. So one thing you'll notice, the left channel went above 0 dBFS there. And so we're going to need to make sure that gets fixed before we do the final render, or else we'll have clipping. The other thing I noticed, this choir left track is quite a bit louder than the choir right. So I'm going to start off by adjusting the loudness of these tracks. And one thing I like to do before I do this is kind of go to the end and split all the tracks where the applause starts. And I can do that by pressing S as a keyboard shortcut. And then to get an idea of where these clips peak, if I press, I think it's Control-Shift-N, that will normalize, quote unquote, each track so that it peaks at 0 dBFS. And so one thing I noticed while we were listening earlier, yeah, that choir left is quite a bit louder. It only went up 2.4 dB, and the right track went up 9.6. So about a difference of 7 dB, and the center track seems to be somewhere in the middle. So there was probably someone who was singing very loudly, who was more on the left than the right. So I'm not actually going to boost these choir tracks because this one is already almost close to clipping. But the percussion tracks could use a little bit of a boost. So I'm going to do that. And then this behind podium track could definitely use a boost. I like to have some headroom, maybe 2 to 5 dB. So I'm not going to boost them a ton. But if I select these tracks and I boost them, maybe I'll boost these ones 3 dB. And this behind podium, it clipped it around 10 dB. So maybe I'll boost it 5. And that really the only thing this does is it just makes the waveforms a little easier to see, and that's useful because we're going to be doing all our mixing with the faders at the end of the day anyway. Now back to this choir thing. I don't want to boost any of these because, well, I might boost the rate. Let's see, 9 dB. Yeah, so I think I'm going to take this and I'll bump it up 7, just so it matches the choir left. But now the issue is this choir, and actually that seems to be a bit louder just visually looking at it. I mean, let's take a listen here. And actually, maybe not. Let's just solo the choir and see. So I was mistaken. It looks like the left is still a little louder. So I'm just going to boost this 1 dB more. And I should be able to do that, I think. Yeah. So let's boost that 8. And so one alternative way to go about this is instead of, trying to boost each one just the right amount, you could go in and normalize everything and then turn everything down a little bit to have some headroom. That would work as well. And maybe you prefer that. And you're welcome to that. It might be a little more efficient. So I'm going to solo these choirs again. And I'm going to be working with the choir a lot. I want to mix it all together. And so I'm actually going to create a folder for this. So I'm going to select these 3 tracks. I click here, and then if I hold down Shift, I can select all of them in a row. And then if I right-click and move tracks to folder, new folder track, I'll call this track choir. And I did that by double-clicking here next to the record arm button. And then I can collapse this. For now, I'm not going to because I do want to see these waveforms. But now I can solo all of the choir together. And this definitely seems more balanced. Let's go to a quieter part and see how balanced it is. Okay. And this is why I don't really want to go too much. I might actually drop this by a decibel. Because you can see on the meters here, when there's no choir singing, having the right too loud would make the orchestra be unbalanced. Right, so in this case, the right is now louder than the left. The convenient thing, I think this behind podium recording, which has the orchestra in it, is biased to the left. No, it's also biased to the right. So we'll just keep our ears out for that while we're mixing. But I'm going to go ahead and collapse that choir track now that I think it's relatively balanced, and I can make it a little smaller. And then I'll zoom in so we can just use those waveforms if we need. The last thing is the keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and, if I normalize these, they have 10 dB of headroom. So they all peak at the same place. And I'm just going to use this alternative strategy. Not all of them have 10 dB. So some have more. And the difference between those 2 keyboard shortcuts I used, one is Shift-N. And that will normalize everything so that all of the tracks get turned up the same amount to the point where any of them peak. Whereas if I do Control-Shift-N, it'll maximize each track individually. So I see the other 10 dB, and I want to keep the tracks consistent. So I'm going to raise them all by the same amount. I'm going to raise them by maybe 8 dB. And that's probably going to be too loud in the mix, but then I'll use the faders to adjust from there. I just want to be able to see these waveforms. Maybe it's not too loud, actually. But so I want the choir to be a bit louder. Instead of mixing up, I'm going to start by turning everything else down. So first I'm going to turn this behind podium recording down a little bit. Maybe that's too quiet. I like that violin tremolo there. I like that volume. Is it here? Yeah. And I think the choir is a little too loud at this part. So what I could do is I could turn the choir down. But I think the balance was pretty good here. So instead of turning the choir down, I only want to turn the choir down during the loud parts. And so I'm going to add compression. So I'll go here to the track FX window. And then I will select Reacomp. And that's the built-in Reaper compressor. And now let's take a look at this. So here I have the threshold, and it's going to show the input level here on the left. This is going to show how much compression is being applied, and this is going to show the output. So right now, no compression is being applied because the threshold is at 0 dB, and the choir never goes above 0 dB. So I'm going to turn this threshold down until during the quiet parts, it just bumps up against it. And just with these default settings, I think it already sounds pretty good. But I'm going to turn up the attack a bit and maybe turn up the release a bit, just so it's a little more consistent. And this ratio might be a little strong, but I liked the ratio there. So let's listen to that again. Yeah, I think it turns it down a little too much. So I'm going to go with a lighter ratio on the compressor. So now that the compressor has turned down the choir, I think the keyboard is cutting through a little too much. So I'm going to turn down the keyboard track. And I like how the percussion cuts through. I want that crash cymbal to be really strong. So I'm going to keep it like that for now. We might want to compress it a little bit, but... I'm curious here, what's coming through in the behind podium recording, because all I heard there was the choir, even though this waveform looks like it's getting louder. So I'm going to take a listen to that. Well, and I wasn't really able to hear those strings, and I sort of want to be able to hear them there. Let's take a listen to that again and see if we can do anything. Okay, so I think we can compress the choir a little more to let everything else stand out. Let's hear how that sounds. Huh. I think that's better. I think I might go a little higher on the compression. I think that sounds good. Let's hear back here how it sounds now. All right, I think that sounds pretty good. So I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the percussion, and this is probably a good spot to look at it because it has a lot of hits here. So let's take a listen and also see if this keyboard might be too loud. So again, I want to work on this percussion as a group, so I'm going to select these two items. Right-click, move tracks to folder, new folder track, and I'm going to call this percussion. So now I can collapse this and work on it all at once. So let's solo this and see what this sounds like. Let's hear how it blends in. I think it's overpowering a little bit when we listen to it. Yeah, I think it's a little too loud, so I'm going to turn it down. Let's hear how it sounds and adjust it a little bit. And again, I'm not hearing these strings too much, so I'm going to bring these up a little bit. But I think the percussion's good now. All right. I think this is pretty decent for a preliminary mix. You might want to spend a little more time mixing on an actual project, just listening to different parts and going through and making sure everything sounds balanced, especially with keyboards, like each track, listening to each track through and make sure it sounds balanced, because sometimes they can be different volumes. But for the sake of this example, I think this is pretty decent, and I'm going to move on to mastering now. So as I mentioned before, generally it's considered best practice to, once you're done with your mix, export it, render it as one file, and then master that one file on its own. There's the obvious reason of, well, maybe it's not so obvious, but the straightforward reason of it'll use less computing power, because instead of mastering a bunch of tracks, you're just mastering two, left and right. And so maybe your DAW will run faster. But it's more of a psychological best practice that you're not going to go back and adjust your mix while you're mastering. Personally, I don't follow this advice. I like to have everything in one project. And you're welcome to do what works best for you, but I would experiment, and you're welcome to try that quote-unquote best practice. But in this case, I'm going to, for simplicity, do everything in the same project. So I click here. This is the master effects window. So these effects will be applied after everything has been mixed down into left and right. And again, during mastering, I might want to make some small changes to the tone and then make the track loud. And one thing I do actually want to revisit the mix a little bit and just see if there's any changes we want to make in EQ to any of these tracks. I think that the frequency distribution of this track suits the piece well. It sounds kind of dark, and I like that. Let's take a look at this one. So I think there maybe are too many mids here. Let's take a listen and see if we can do anything. Again, we want to do this before mastering so that during mastering we don't do anything to the entire track that really we should have just done to individual tracks, because it'll hurt the sound of the other tracks. And I'm not sure there's anything I would want to do here. I'm personally I don't think I'm very good at EQ. I can't hear the differences that well. But you can experiment and see if you think you can get the tone of something to sound better. I will take a look at the keyboard. Generally these sometimes these tracks, depending on the instrument, can have a lot of bass and it's kind of overpowering. But I think for the timpani, this is pretty good. And I kind of want that bass to be there. Lastly, I'm going to look at the choir. I already did, but I think that tone is good. And then the percussion, I was paying attention earlier. It's pretty treble heavy. But that might be what we want. Let's take a listen and see if we want to adjust anything. So it seems like it's just cymbals in this case. So I'm probably going to cut out the bass just so I don't have that interfering or overpowering the other tracks and making them too muddy. And you can hear the cymbal doesn't have any frequencies in this range. So really I'm just cutting these out so the other tracks can have a little more of a clean bass, whereas this is mostly just room reverb, which I might not want. Cool, and I think that's pretty good. Let's see how much bass I want in the choir. Again, I'm just going to put this low pass to cut out any room reverb that I don't really want, because I don't think the choir sings below 80 hertz. Now here I don't want to cut the bass out because you can hear the contrabass, and we don't want to really affect that. Maybe I'll put a really low high pass. But even that I think cuts too much bass. So I'm going to leave that alone. Last thing, I did mention reverb. I might want to add a little bit of reverb to the choir to make it sound more like it's in a large kind of hall. Give it a bit of a darker tone. So let's add a track. I'm going to call this the reverb track. And I'm going to put a reverb plugin. Reverberate is what I like to use. I'm going to turn down the wet signal on this entirely, and that'll be the reason will become clear in a moment. It's because we're going to use a send. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send by clicking the Sends, Receives, and Hardware Output Options button on the choir. I'm going to send the choir to the reverb track. And maybe I'll send -7 dB. So what's going to happen, this will get sent to the reverb track. The choir will still be playing the raw signal, but it's going to get turned. It's going to duplicate this choir signal. It'll turn it down 7 dB, and it'll send that signal to the reverb track. And then the reverb will apply this plugin and play the output of this plugin. So effectively, I can control how much wet I have by adjusting the volume of the choir channel here. And then I can adjust how much dry I have by adjusting the amount that gets sent to that reverb channel. So let's hear how this sounds. And if I solo the choir, it will keep the reverb playing, so we can still hear it. It does make it a little bit louder, I can tell. I'm just going to solo the reverb and make sure that's working. Oh, and whoops, I mixed up wet and dry, so sorry. This should be 0, this should be all the way down, because dry is going to mix in the original signal. So now that's wet reverb. But if I unsolo this and I just listen to the choir, I think that sounds a little better. It kind of gives it a darker tone and makes it sound a little more operatic. Now, the point of using a send is we can reuse this effect. So, for example, if I wanted to put reverb on the percussion, I could just add a send here. And actually, I sort of like that. Let's take a listen. I'm also going to add a little bit of reverb to this behind podium track because it is pretty close to the strings. Yeah. I'm going to take some off of this. I think it was adding a little too much reverb to the other orchestra parts it was picking up. Instead, we'll get that through this track. I think that sounds a lot better. Cool. And you would probably want to spend some more time with the reverb to make sure it doesn't make things too muddy. But for now, I think we're good now. Let's move on to mastering. So I'm going to go to the Master Effects window, and I might start out with an EQ just to change the tone of things a little bit. Oh yeah, the other thing is this send post fader. Okay, yeah, good. I just want to make sure the compression was on the choir before it got sent to the reverb. Seems like it is. I think I want to cut the highs a bit. It sounds a little too bright, especially for this piece. I want it to kind of have a dark sound. The strings cut through especially, but the choir and percussion as well, I think. I think that's all I want to do in regards to EQ. Again, I'm not particularly confident in my EQ abilities, so you might be listening to this and just screaming at your screen right now, but hopefully this is at least helpful for demonstration. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just curious how loud this track is. So I can go to a loud part and play, and I can look down here at the loudness meter. So this loud part is around -14, but the rest of the song is quieter. To get an idea, I'm going to render this project. And I did that by pressing Ctrl-Alt-R. You can also go here to File and Render. And if I click Dry Run, it's going to render the piece as it is right now. And it's going to give me a LUFS I reading of -17. So I probably want to turn this up by about 3 dB to get to -14 LUFS I, which is our loudness target. Now again, in some cases that might not be possible. It might make the song sound too crushed, or the piece sound too crushed, and there might be exceptions. But generally, let's try and get to -14. I do like the dynamic range, though, of the piece. I don't want to compress it that much, so I'm going to just put a very light compressor, maybe a 2:1. I'm going to give it a long attack and a long release. And this way it'll just compress the dynamic range. It's not going to really do anything to the peaks. Even this I think is too strong. I'm going to go really light, like 1.5. So it'll just turn the loud parts down a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn everything up. So effectively, we're going to turn up the quiet parts. And here, I'm going to use a limiter for this. I'm going to set the brick wall ceiling to -1. And to start, I'm going to check this constant gain box. That's going to link the threshold in the brick wall ceiling so that when I adjust this limiter, it sounds just as loud. And that way, I'll be able to hear if the limiter is making the piece sound worse without the fact that using a limiter is going to make it sound louder, biasing my judgment. So I'm going to go to a loud part of the piece, like here. And right there on that crash cymbal, I could hear it distort a little bit, I think. Cool. This sounds pretty good. I actually don't think we need that much limiting, so I'm going to leave it at -5. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to uncheck that constant gain box, and I'm going to put the brick wall ceiling back at -1. And that's going to turn it up 5 dB. So if you want, adjust your volume right now. But now let's hear how this part sounds. Cool, and I think that sounds pretty good. The quiet parts should sound fine. The limiter shouldn't be touching them. Let's render it now and see how loud this is. And boom, negative 14.1. I'll turn the limiter up just a little bit to meet that target. Cool, and that's pretty good. One last thing, I'm just going to come here and look at the applause. And that's a little loud in my opinion. So what I like to do, I like to just delete a lot of the applause tracks. You can choose which ones sound the best. And it is also probably a good idea to fade these tracks out in that case. I'm going to fade these ones out as well. Nope. And let's hear how that sounds now. That sounds pretty natural. This is still too loud. I like to go for a LUFS S of maybe negative 20 for the applause. So I'm going to turn this down about 5 dB. And I'm going to fade between these tracks. So I can do that by going down to the bottom right here until my cursor looks like this, and then sliding this over, and that'll fade into this quieter track. So there we go. We peak it around negative 20 LUFS S. And with that, let's see what our loudness is at now. Cool. Still negative 14. Nice. And so this is, you know, I would probably want to take some more time to look at it. But I would say good to go. So I'll save this and I'll render it to a file. Maybe I'll call it... That looks like a good file name. Ludwig the Accursed and Holy Blade mastered. And I'll put it in my downloads for now. This is set to 44.1 kilohertz. This was recorded at 48, so we're going to master at that. And it's in stereo. I'm going to export in FLAC at 24-bit. And with that, oh, and then I'll save these settings because it shouldn't stay in 44.1 kilohertz. It should be 48. So then I'll render this. Now I'll render it to a file. Just check all the numbers look right. And this looks pretty good to me. So hopefully that was helpful. Next time we'll jump into another example project, but maybe more of an ensemble type. So thanks for watching.